Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our Smarter series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's Debrief. This is our weekly deep breath when it comes to the news. And it's a little bit of a gasp, actually, this week, if I'm completely honest, because usually Thursday is a great day. You have a couple days of the week of stories developing, and then you can sort of sit with some of the headlines. They're a little bit more mature than they were at the beginning of the week. I don't know what happened. But over the last 24 hours, we got a bunch of different updates on stories that we've been covering, and many of them could really impact you in a very real way in your day-to-day life. So I'm going to go through a couple of these stories. We're going to hopscotch around the world, in fact, to space as well, which I'll get to in just a moment, because we have a massive discovery that we should put in context of the news cycle as well. But I hope you're doing well. It has been a bumpy ride. I can't believe that we're in the middle of May already. Pretty soon the year is going to be half over, and look at some of the big stories that we've really taken a closer look at together. I appreciate being able to do this with you because it really gives meaning to a lot of my work and a great sense of purpose, and I really appreciate that. I don't take a bunch of notes. I like to just be able to talk to you very directly about the stories that we're going to be covering on our debrief. But one of the things I wrote down last night, I was actually making the kids' lunches, peanut butter and jelly. I'm at the point of the school year where I have no new creative ideas. And as I'm doing this, as any mother will know, my brain is just going in a million different directions, which, by the way, we'll get to, because that's also a story, not my brain, but the mom brain. And I wrote down on my notes as I was thinking through, well, how am I going to set up this debrief? Because this is sort of how I work throughout the week. And I wrote this phrase, it's not just about that. It's not just about that. Do you know that phrase? When someone does something and you're like, yeah, we can talk about it, but it's not just about that. We could even bring a real stereotype into it. Let's say, my husband forgets to roll the garbage cans to the end of the driveway, a job which I do very often, by the way. But let's just say he forgets to do it. I was like, sorry, I forgot. It's not just about that. It's not just about that. A lot of the stories we're covering this week, we have a headline, but it's not just about that. It's about a lot of other issues. So real quick, I want to start with a story that's impacting a lot of families. And this has to do with the baby formula shortage. But don't go away if you don't have a baby, because it's not just about that. It's not just about that. So the baby formula shortage has become really big news. Just for context, we talked a little bit about this week, but if you have a 10% shortage of anything, when we're thinking about supplies on shelves, the 10% short, that could be significant. In some major American cities, we're at 50%. I went into a Target the other day. There's no baby formula. And again, just for some more added context, a lot of women may nurse, may breastfeed, but even if you do that, I did that with my 3 children, you still sometimes use formula. Formula is just something that a lot of families use no matter their decision about what they're feeding their children. And then in addition to that, you have kids that are much older that also need formula because they need certain nutrition. They have certain nutrition needs. So yes, this is a certain segment of the American population, sure, but it affects a lot of families, and it's creating a lot of anxiety. This was interesting. The FDA just released an updated new press release on this topic. Clearly, the anxiety and the tension over this is something that is putting further pressure on the FDA to kind of figure out, well, listen, do we need to keep this plant, this Abbott Labs plant, closed in Michigan that's been producing a lot of powdered baby formula, a lot of formula, or not? Because just to back up, one of the reasons we're in this situation is, yes, we do have a supply chain issue that has impacted so many industries during the pandemic. But specific to baby formula, and I didn't know this until I took a breath on this story, there were several babies that were sickened and 2 babies that died. And there's no direct connection to this baby formula made by Abbott Labs. However, it's something that these babies had in common. So that's enough to spark an investigation. And that's part of the reason why you had this massive recall of product. So a lot of product coming off the shelf. And then you had some product just kind of sitting in this plant, and then the plant shut down. You can't produce anything. And this is one of the reasons why we're in this situation. So the FDA came out and said, listen, we're working as fast as we can. We're working with all sorts of partners to try to fill the void in the industry. They also noted that purchases in April of baby formula were up. And what they're insinuating is, hey, a lot of people are just buying this stuff and hoarding it. So do we really have an issue, or are people just nervous and they're hanging on? They're trying to get as much formula as they can because of an anticipation, which, by the way, we can all understand because we've all been there, haven't we? Maybe not with baby formula, but with some other things from our household during the pandemic. A question about, well, maybe I should buy a little bit more of that. That can affect the industry. But here's an important point that I wanted to just share with any families that could be in a real bind. I mean, really wondering what they're going to do for their kids. This is interesting. So the FDA said they're not objecting to Abbott Nutrition releasing product to individuals needing urgent, life-sustaining supplies. So what they're saying is that if you need to appeal to get some product, that you can do so. This is on the FDA website, and I'll make sure to link to it as well underneath our video on YouTube, but also best through our website, because then you can click right through to it. It's a lot easier to this. So listen to this. In these circumstances, the benefit of allowing caregivers in consultation with their healthcare providers to access these products may outweigh the potential risk of bacterial infection. They're investigating bacteria because it was the bacterial infection that caused these issues in these little babies. So that's something to note, and especially if you have friends that are really, really feeling that pressure, there is a way to do this, to at least appeal for supplies. So this is something to watch. But it's not just about baby formula. It's a question of how could we actually be in this situation? How can we the world's most powerful economy can't source baby formula. Let's take it in conjunction with another news item that we found out about just maybe even an hour ago. Scientists have taken the first image of a black hole in our galaxy. In 2019, we covered this story. The first image of a black hole was released to the world, not in our galaxy, though. It was actually farther away. Turns out, like the Milky Way, the black hole is a little bit more difficult, even though it's a little bit closer. And by closer, let me see. It's 27,000 light years away. Would that make sense? I don't know. I can't read my notes. That's not very good. It's a long way away. You can't drive there. You can't drive there, right? So we can take what we've been able to do using 8 different observatories around the world is take a picture of a black hole in the middle of our galaxy that none of us will likely ever travel to. We can do that. But if you want to buy baby formula, you're in a tough spot. You see what I mean? It's interesting to see what we're able to do and then what we can't do. So you're telling me that we were able to coordinate 8 different observatories around the world, take a picture of this black hole that no one's ever seen before, that could actually help explain, even the structure of the galaxy. They're saying that this will change physics forever because we're going to be able to compare black holes. We never were able to do that because now we have 2 different images. We can do all of that, but we can't figure out how to produce more baby formula. We can do all of that, but we can't do immigration reform. You know what I mean? We can do all of that, but we can't figure out a way to stop the war in Ukraine. It really makes you wonder what is a reality and what is a choice. And I'm not obviously saying that it's a choice to not be able to get baby formula on the shelves, but where there is a will, there is a way. So why is this so difficult? If this could happen to baby formula in the United States, what other items can it happen to that we should be aware of? I was thinking back, well, what does our household use and I was trying to compare it to other generations, would I think that milk would be necessary in households? A lot of people are drinking oat milk. You don't even need milk anymore. Eggs. Like, what is the thing that you use all the time that if suddenly you didn't have it, you'd be in a real bind? We have such diversity in our economy. It's amazing. We're able to go to the store and we buy all sorts of different things. Yeah, sometimes it can be an inconvenience if there's a shortage, but in general, we can still get it. So this is why this story matters, not just for families that are impacted by this right away, but it also matters because it causes us to ask the question, well, wait a minute, where are the rest of the vulnerabilities? What should we actually know about? What questions should we be asking about this? Especially as we see in this week's data that inflation, the pressure on the economy remains. The unknown in the economy still remains. So if we're learning from the last several years, what should we know about when it comes to supply? That could be important for us. So that's one of the questions that I'm going to be asking about. Speaking of what's happening overseas, all of that impacts us as well. I want to just mention a couple stories that I think are really important to have on your radar. They all sort of tie together, and we're going to kind of go back and forth between domestic, international, and just talk a little bit about this. One of the news items we woke up to this Thursday morning is Finland saying they are going to pursue joining NATO. This hasn't happened in the past. When you think of Finland, you may think, well, isn't it already in NATO? Isn't it already, isn't all of Europe already in NATO, the largest military alliance that exists? No, it hasn't been the case. And in some ways, Finland has really embraced this sort of idea of neutrality. They have Russia right up against their border. In fact, I want to show you a picture of that because, again, Finland is a country, you're like, oh yeah, Finland. But then you have to see it on a map and really understand, okay, where is Finland in relation to Russia? Where is Finland in relation to Germany? Finland is a little bit by itself, and it actually shares a border with Russia that is very long. And that's part of the reason in the past, Russia has sort of threatened directly or indirectly Finland about joining NATO because of this idea that NATO's growth is an act of aggression against Russia. And so you can get an idea of what this border looks like and why Russia would be concerned if NATO joins an alliance that Russia believes is out to get Russia. Now, of course, NATO denies that. One of the important things to remember about military and technology, no matter, whether or not we're photographing black holes, millions of whatever light years away, trillions of miles, these numbers are so big, I could even just throw any of them out. We can't even conceive the distance, right? When it comes to military and defense and how you're organizing your military, proximity still matters. Yes, we have these amazing weapons that are very difficult for us to even conceive as well. But proximity is important. And so one of the things that NATO has done is that as an alliance, we've positioned troops and weapons closer to Russia's border. This is one of the reasons why Russia was concerned about Ukraine joining NATO, because of the strategic position. It's not just about the symbolism, it's about the strategic position. So this is a very interesting move by Finland to say, you know what? Yeah, it's time. It's time. And when Finland's leader was asked, well, what about Russia? Like, what do you think? And basically he said something to the effect of, well, Vladimir Putin needs to look in the mirror, because the reason why we're doing this is not because, we're out to get Russia, but considering what's happened over the last several months in Ukraine, this is all part of the calculation to consider this. So that's really big news that, it's not a real swift process to join NATO. So this will be a story to watch to see how quickly this actually takes place. And this will also be interesting to see, do we see other countries, raise their hand and say, yeah, we're going to start pursuing that now? What would that mean for NATO? What would that mean for the United States as well? Especially as this conflict in Ukraine, this war in Ukraine continues, and we continue to see headlines of the atrocities that are happening in Ukraine. Russia, of course, denies that, says what Russia is doing is protecting the motherland, protecting what Russia is and what Russia stands for. So that's important to note, that that's a really big story. In the meantime, I want to switch gears, though, and take you to Asia. We've been watching COVID cases in China. We've been talking quite a lot about the Shanghai lockdown. And that's a story that we have to continue to watch, because inflation, by the way, and pressure on the U.S. economy is not just here, it's also in China. So we have a lot of governments handling a lot of pressure, whether it's COVID policies, national security, immigration, inflation, any of those things. We're still seeing government and leaders very much under pressure. Speaking of leaders, the North Korean leader came out today and said that there is the first confirmed COVID cases in North Korea. And you could say, well, wait, I'm sorry, excuse me. We've been in this pandemic 2 years, and this is the first confirmed case that North Korea could have. Yes, North Korea is an isolated nation. There's not a bunch of travel happening all the time. It's in the same way, let's say, into Beijing or Shanghai or something like that, or into LAX or JFK in New York City. A little bit different. There is some travel, but it's not the tourist hub of some of these other places. And obviously, this is a regime that keeps a lot of confinement on its public about what the public can do. So the fact that North Korea even announced this publicly is a really big deal and is leading people to wonder, these experts in this field. Remember, again, you're not getting insight from the ground, but the thinking is if North Korea is announcing this, then it's likely that it's obviously not just a few cases. And in a country that is very poor with very bad healthcare in relation to its neighbors, what could this mean for North Korea? And is this almost a cry for help or an opening for negotiations for help or aid? Because what else has North Korea been doing? It's been test firing missiles. In fact, it just test fired a missile reportedly after this announcement. So it's been very provocative in its actions. So could it be positioning itself, again, this is a hypothetical situation, could it be positioning itself to say, we actually need some aid. If you give us some health care aid, then we'll stop doing our tests. One of the things we've been watching for, because North Korea has nuclear weapons, has done nuclear tests before. This is part of the reason why this is a complicated diplomatic situation, not just the isolation of North Korea and their philosophy about government, but also because it's a nuclear-armed nation. President Biden is expected to visit Asia at the end of May. And so there's this question about, well, could North Korea attempt a really big missile test during his visit or in the lead up to his visit to get attention? And so you're seeing a lot of these kind of moving parts to the story in North Korea. Why do we care about North Korea? Why is it not just about that, not just about that COVID test that came back positive in North Korea? We know that North Korea is a nuclear-armed nation. We know North Korea is one of only 4 countries that is on a State Department list of state sponsors of terrorism, which means these are governments that support terrorists or terrorist activities around the world. And so again, it's not just about North Korea having this sort of advanced weaponry and missile technology. It's about whether or not they're talking to Iran, who is also on that list, for example. So this is why I always want to make sure we're just keeping an eye on some of these big international stories. So one quick thing I want to tell you about, one of the things I was able to do this week is I've been really curious. Obviously, there's a lot of focus on COVID still. The White House today is holding an event about COVID. We know that even though in many of our daily lives, and hopefully for you, all of you are healthy and happy wherever you are, that COVID is still something that we all talk about, but it's different than it was 2 years ago. We could probably all agree on that. Still, you still see people get sick. You still see hospitalizations. You still see deaths. So we're really paying close attention to COVID too, to see, is it going to follow the pattern that it has over the last couple of years, where we saw a little bit of a spike in the Northeast? Could we see another spike in the summer in the South as we've done? What does flu season really look like? There's always an eye towards that. And this is why I want to make sure that we don't forget this story. And I actually did an interview on it this week as well, so you can spend a little bit more time on this topic. Over the last couple of weeks, the World Health Organization, as well as the CDC, has raised an alert about a new virus in children that's causing hepatitis. Hepatitis-like illness. It is hepatitis. It's an infection of the liver, and they can't quite figure out what's going on with this. Like, why are the children getting sick and having these liver issues? One of the things they can't quite figure out is whether or not we are more acute with our healthcare. Perhaps, hepatitis cases can come up. They can come up in children. They can lead to deaths. They can lead to liver transplants. That can happen. So are we seeing something new and different, or are we sort of tracking better and paying closer attention to what's really affecting children all over the world? Because, maybe you are bringing in your child more quickly when they're sick. Maybe we're paying closer attention to illnesses that are rapidly developing, or maybe we're going to the hospital more. Who knows any of these reasons? What you should know about this, though, is that the CDC is investigating cases of this in 25 states. So half of the United States of America has some sort of cases that the CDC says could be this. It's not hepatitis A, B, or C. It's not the tip. When they're testing these kids for hepatitis, they're not testing positive for any of those known hepatitis viruses. Some of them are testing positive for adenovirus, which is a very typical cold virus. Cold can cause stomach issues. You're just sick. It's not a fun time, right? But you can get adenovirus and you don't get hepatitis. But because not all of these kids, at least so far from the labs, not all of them have adenovirus, then the question is, well, kids running around have adenovirus. They can also have SARS-CoV-2. They could have any number of viruses. And in fact, our guest, Dr. Megan Martin, who is in pediatrics, she's an emergency room physician that only focuses on pediatrics, says sometimes when you test kids that come into the ER, you might get a cornucopia of different viruses that they test positive for just because they're exposed, but they may not necessarily be sick from those viruses. So this is a little bit of a mystery. What is the new alert from the CDC, again, over the last several hours, is they're really encouraging physicians to test for adenovirus. So I actually asked my pediatrician about this last week. We were just doing an annual appointment for my 6-year-old. We're talking about a bunch of different things. And I said, what do you think about that? Have you seen anything about this? And she says she hadn't. And I said, well, do you test for adenovirus? If my child came in and was sick, would you test? And she said, well, sometimes you can just diagnose it based on a couple of the symptoms that someone could have. Bad respiratory symptoms, but also a stomach ache, but it's not the flu. You might say, well, it's presumed adenovirus. And there's, you're going to just treat the symptoms. But the CDC is asking pediatricians now to test more aggressively for adenovirus so that they would know if the kids that are coming, are we seeing something with adenovirus, whatever it is that we should know about. So I want you guys to be aware of that. I wrote the CDC. I was hoping to get an answer. Maybe I still will. You never know. You can cross your fingers, do all sorts of things, stand on your head, try to get an answer. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. It's just kind of the roll of the dice, depending on how busy they are. But my question was, well, are we seeing any of this in adults? Are we seeing any rising rates of hepatitis cases in adults? Many of you have asked as well about whether or not prior infection of COVID could be a factor here. And we've talked a lot about second and third order effects. Could the virus that causes COVID maybe doesn't cause severe illness in some, but then months later has a second or third order effect? Maybe. The problem with some of these cases that the CDC is investigating, they date back 7 months. So unless you got some of the specimens then, it's very hard to go back. And that could be one of the reasons why the CDC is asking for more information now. So I want you to be aware of it. Again, we're always keeping an eye towards flu season. I want you guys to be healthy, happy, run around, doing all the things that you want to do. And so just want you aware of that. And especially because those headlines can be really scary, talking about sick kids. Okay, final thing today, I just wanted to share, I want to add something to our weekly debrief, because oftentimes I read a lot of interesting things, but they're not necessarily newsy, but I still want to tell you about it. That's why our newsletter really matters. So if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, we get to put a lot of the things we find really interesting, but maybe aren't that headline that you need to know if you only have 30 seconds every day. We put those in the newsletter, which makes it a lot of fun. So I wanted to share maybe once a week, like what is one of the more interesting things, or what is the most interesting things that I read or heard or saw this week. And so this got my attention. This is from The Atlantic magazine. And the title of this article, it's hard for me to say without laughing. Mom brain isn't a joke. See, it's not a joke. It's not a joke. Mom brain isn't a joke. In fact, the whole article is about how people reference mom brains because that sort of scattered feeling, you forget your keys, you're like, oh, mom brain, When in reality, there is some physiological changes in the brain of a mother. By the way, what I learned in this article is also true for fathers and true for fathers and non-biological parents. So if you're parenting at all in any way, your brain is actually impacted. Very interesting. But as this writer points out, no one ever hears about dad brain. Excellent point. You don't hear about dad brain. So the whole article is sort of exploring this concept of mom brain and whether or not it's sort of a dismissal of something else that's happening. For example, like I was doing just last night, making lunches and trying to figure out Russian foreign policy at the same time, like that's, and then being angry that I didn't clean the kitchen or something, right? There's so much going on. So this is something I wanted to, I wanted to quote for you. So one of the doctors that did some research on this topic said the cognitive labor of running a household is as intense as running a Fortune 500 company. The team of researchers looked at 2 years. So this is before the pandemic, okay? 2 years before the pandemic, 2016 to 2018, among 200 mothers who were managing more than 2/3 of the conception and planning of their household tasks while also working for pay. Every single one of them had a physical manifestation of stress. Seems obvious, right? Seems obvious. But I think that's something for us all to remember. And I think it's true for moms or dads, by the way, right? If you're running a household, if you're trying to organize anything, whether it's a sports team, your summer vacation, any of those things, let's say you don't have any kids, you're just trying to run your household, you're just trying to keep things organized. It's sort of like running a Fortune 500 company. So that's something to maybe be a little bit proud about, and then think about, well, if I was running a Fortune 500 company, I would do it differently. So maybe we need to apply some of that to our households. I don't know. If I find out a better way, I'll share it with you. A smarter way to parent and to work. Right now, it's just about getting through every hour or every day. By the way, some of the more interesting things that I research for you on a weekly basis and report on, sometimes I don't have answers for. And that's actually a story in and of itself. So I want to leave you with something I'm going to be looking into next week. I found a couple great sources. Neither of them had any of the information that I particularly wanted. But many of you have asked about the money going to Ukraine because we continue to send a lot of foreign aid to Ukraine. In fact, one of the estimates I saw said right now it's about $100 million a day. So let's come full circle with some of our stories, right? $100 million a day to Ukraine, billions and billions of dollars, a lot of agreement actually between Republicans and Democrats, which means there's not a lot of debate on the House floor about any of these issues. It's kind of going through. Once the money goes through and goes out the door, it's also very difficult to track and to audit and to really understand where it's going all the time. So many of you have asked, like, well, where's that? Where is that money? Some of you have asked in relation to the baby formula story, for example. Wait a minute, we can't figure out baby formula, but we're sending all of this money to Ukraine. We can't, figure out how to best handle a lot of the major issues in our nation, whether it's education or immigration or any of these big issues. But we're sending all this money to Ukraine. Like, what's up with that? Where's the money coming from? I don't know. I want to be really honest with you. I don't know. Obviously, it's our money. I mean, when it comes down to it, it's taxpayer money. It's our money. You, me, anybody who's paying taxes in the United States, Congress is allocating that money. That's one of the things that they're supposed to do, ways and means, right? They're figuring out no taxation without representation. They're representing us. And when it comes to emergency aid, this is where it gets tricky. When something's emergency aid related, sometimes the money can be pulled for a lot of different areas. I can't quite figure it out yet, so I'm going to need to dig into that. And I just wanted to let you know that I hear you on that issue, and I think it's a really important issue as well. I think it's always important to know where our money is going. So those are a couple things that I'm going to be working out on for the week ahead. If you have any other stories that you'd like me to look at, please let me know. I'll be following up on that. We'll have the interview with Dr. Megan Martin on this mysterious illness in children that we should be aware of. And remember, often with the news stories, the headlines, it's not just about that. It's not just about the headline itself. It's about a broader issue. And if we can go a little bit deeper, usually we can figure out, well, why does that story bother me so much? Why are there such feelings attached to this? Because it's not just about that. It's not just about the baby formula. It's about the supply chain overall. It's not just about the money going to Ukraine. It's also about, well, what are we investing in as a nation? What is best for our national security? How can we invest our money most wisely to make sure that we're safe and secure and healthy and happy? It's not just about the COVID cases in North Korea. It's about North Korea being a nuclear armed nation that's already unstable. So what about a pandemic exploding in that particular country? What could that mean? So we just have to have this exercise. It's not just about that. And we can't just throw it at our friends and family when we get upset. It's not just about that. I'm asking it more with a curious tone. It's not just about that. It's a friendly tone, not a mean tone. Although it is a phrase that we can use in a lot of different ways. Anyhow, great to see all you guys. Thank you so much for the support and love for Smarter News. We really appreciate it. We have a whole bunch of these stories already up on our website today. So check it out if you just need to kind of peruse something fun. We have a lot of links to videos and great articles on our website. And of course, we have our podcast and our newsletter at the end of the week. And if you haven't signed up for that, you can do from any social media platform as well as our website. So, and I don't flood your email. I don't sell your data. I just want to send you one email a week. I'm so overwhelmed by the number of emails. I'm just wondering what we all do from this point on. If you have an organization, company for emails, we all need to hear from you, because that would be a smarter tip that could help us. But that's one of the reasons why I don't send you a bunch of emails. I think you probably already have plenty. And we're about clarity, not clutter. So questions, comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. Have a great day, and I'll see you with more. Bye, guys. Quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.